Hey, welcome back. This is Mr. Shanahan with Magnet Sociology. This is Chapter 13, The Economy and Politics. We'll start out with talking about a case study about liars and loans. Then Section 1, we'll talk about the economic institution. Section 2, the United States economy. And in Section 3, the political institution. And then Section 4, the United States political system. And then we'll talk about applying what you've learned so far in this chapter. So in the first decade of the 2000s, the United States financial system faced a crisis caused by the banks, other lenders making loans to people who could not pay their loans back. What they would do is they would give out these loans that would give really good rates to people to open up, but then they couldn't pay the loans because they really didn't have the financial ability to make those purchases. In previous years, lenders made money on these risky loans by selling them to other financial institutions. And so one institution would make all these loans and then they would sell them off to another company, and it was shuffling paper is what it did. Eventually, however, these weak loans led to a financial crisis where they had overextended themselves, and some likened it to the beginning of the Great Depression, and it was very similar to that, and create a huge economic crash. And many of these people lost their homes. The rates of delinquency and foreclosures, as you can see from this graph, took a sudden increase in 2007 and 2008. And this was under the George W. Bush administration. Section 1, the economic institutions. Societies develop economic institutions to decide how to allocate their resources. Economic systems have three basic sectors: primary, secondary, and tertiary. The two economic models are capitalism and socialism. Societies develop economic institutions in order to distribute the limited resources within the society. And so at the end of this section, you should be able to explain how do economic basics affect our society, and what three sectors do all economic systems have? What are the two economic models? Economic basics. Everybody has needs such as food and water, and wants such as a new car stereo. Every society creates a system of roles and norms that governs the production and distribution and consumption of goods. This system is called the economic institution. People's needs and wants are unlimited, but resources are limited. Three questions of an economy: what goods and services should be produced? How should these goods and services be produced? And for whom should these goods and services be produced? Answers depend on the factors of production or resources needed to produce goods and services, such as land and labor. What three questions must every society answer? What goods and services must be produced? How should these goods and services be produced? And for whom should these goods and services be produced? These are the key questions of economics for a society. The basic sectors of the economic system is the primary sector, and where they're extracting raw materials from the environment. The secondary sector, the use of those raw materials to manufacture goods. And the tertiary sector, which provides the services. So primary sector would be your mining. Secondary sector would be smelting and making of steel. And your tertiary sector would be the automobile plant producing the goods for the consumer. In pre-industrial society, there's very little technological development, and all economic activity is carried out by human and animal labor, and focuses on the primary sector. So the United States during the early 19th century was a pre-industrial society, where most of our economy was based on farming and was done by hand. Later on, that economic activity became more industrialized. In the industrialized society, the advances in technology helped move focus to the secondary sector. Higher levels of agriculture production allows for more people, and job specialization increases. So here, this is where the factories would start, and more people started to move to the cities to take on jobs, and instead of being multi-skilled people, you would specialize in a particular portion of your factory work. In post-industrialized societies, which is the United States today, we focus on the tertiary sector, and the greater emphasis is placed on knowledge and collection and distribution of information. And so what we're doing in the post-industrial society is producing data and technology and things like that, rather than raw materials turned into goods. So what economic society is the United States? We're a capitalist society. The United States follows many of the ideas of capitalism. Capitalism, the factors of production are owned by individuals for profit. Competition regulates the activity. Competition is driven by what's called the law of supply. Producers will supply products with a high profit. The law of demand, the demand will increase as the price increases for that particular product. And as the demand decreases, the price should go down. In laissez-faire capitalism, no government regulation takes place. Laissez-faire literally means hands off, and so for in laissez-faire capitalism, the less government involvement there is, the better the system operates. The free enterprise system has limited government control of businesses, and will provide a certain amount of regulation to allow business to operate. On the other hand, with socialism, the factors of production are often owned by the government. The government regulates economic activity. Economic activity is controlled by the social need and central planning of the government. The ideal is in the communist society is a political and economic system in which property is communally owned and the social classes cease to exist and everybody is treated on an equal footing, both economically and socially. All economies fall somewhere in between these two idealized systems. Over time, economies have moved toward the center of this continuum. Our two extreme ends of our economic scale, our philosophers are Adam Smith, who wrote the book, The Wealth of Nations. This is the founding work of modern economics and essentially is the first book of economics. It argued in favor of the ideas of free trade between nations, that there should be as little interference by the government between nations so that trade can take place. And it showed how individuals pursue their economic self-interest to everyone's benefit. Karl Marx, on the other hand, our conflict theorist, wrote a book called wrote the book Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto. And in these books, he argued that the owners make their profits by exploiting the labor of the workers. He believed that this causes a class struggle between owners and workers, and eventually leads to a revolution in which the workers take control from the owners. John Maynard Keynes, who wrote the General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, became one of the most dominant economics theorists of the 20th century. He argued that it is sometimes more important for the government to stabilize the economy to maintain a balanced budget. He established modern macroeconomics and large-scale economics. His books were written shortly after the First World War, and he had a great influence on Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the creation of the New Deal, based much on these Keynesian ideas. Milton Friedman is a prominent economist from Chicago who emerged in the latter part of the 20th century, and he wrote Capitalism and Freedom and started the movement for low taxes and smaller government. And it believed that the government monetary policy is what led to the Great Depression. So, what are the two main economic models? Capitalism and socialism. The United States economy became the strongest in the world in the 1900s. New economic developments have changed the way the U.S. economy works. So the main idea has one of the world's richest and most diverse economies. So why are in the 1900s sometimes called the American century? And what recent developments have transformed the American economic system? The American century is the rise of corporate capitalism. Corporation, a business organization owned by stockholders and treated by law as if it were an individual person. And the Supreme Court has ruled that corporations are people, even though they're not held accountable. An oligopoly is a few large companies that control an industry, and protectionism is the use of trade barriers to protect the domestic manufacturers from foreign competition. Free trade is unrestricted trade between countries. Globalization of corporate capitalism. There's multinational is a corporation that has factories and offices in several countries, generally headquartered in one country. Some large multinationals have bigger economy than some poor nations. Some sociologists see global capitalism as the decline of the nation state. So what two trends have increased the U.S. economic power? The rise of corporate capitalism and globalization. So the corporations are spreading throughout the world. Recent developments. In the United States, work has shifted from the industrial base to a service-based economy. So instead of manufacturing goods, we provide services now, whether that be accounting or house cleaning or something like that. Companies have cut costs by moving jobs to other countries and by eliminating jobs. Many companies are now going to having robots replace their workers, or they ship the jobs to other countries like China and India and other places in the world like that, where the labor costs are much lower than they are here in the United States. The service sector has not absorbed or displaced these workers, and oftentimes many of these service jobs do not pay as well. E-commerce is business conducted over the internet. The internet allows companies to automate many purchases. The internet allows customers to purchase goods from at home, and concerns about personal information and keeping it safe has become a major problem. The internet has begun to eliminate many of our jobs in our local communities. Large companies like Amazon provide many of the goods and services that people want without having to go to a store. And so as a result of that, it pushes many of the smaller businesses out of work. Recent challenges include government debt, Social Security system, subprime mortgage crisis, and rising fuel prices. About half Americans carry debt on their credit card with an average of about $10,000. Americans owe over $2.5 trillion in credit debt. So what three factors led to the reduction of U.S. manufacturing jobs? Advances in technology, globalization, and elimination of less skilled jobs. The economics of online worlds. With millions of players worldwide, massively multiplayer online games such as EverQuest have thriving internal economies. Players earn points or game currency for tasks such as slaying a monster. They use their earnings to buy goods within the game. Many of these MMOGs allow players to run businesses within the virtual world. Some virtual entrepreneurs create restaurants or amusement parks. Others design and sell clothing, furniture, and other virtual goods. Some real-world companies have established virtual versions of themselves within games. The companies who run these MMOGs find themselves confronting economic problems similar to those faced in real-world countries. For example, if players have too much in-game currency, inflation results. Many imaginary currencies have become worth real-world money. Players who lack the time or patience to earn high-level spells or equipment can now purchase those goods online. They pay real-world money for goods that only exist in the virtual world. This has led real-world entrepreneurs to satisfy the demand. Low-paid employees, known as gold farmers, spend hours playing games to collect goods and currency shown above. The businesses then sell these virtual goods for real profits. Most MMOG companies disapprove of the practice. So do many devoted players who resent those who simply purchase what they had to earn through skill and effort. So how does the law of supply explain so many businesses that want to be involved in MMOGs? Section 2. The political institution. Societies exercise power over their members through political institutions. Legitimate power is the authority of power exercised through force is coercion. Two basic types of government are democratic and authoritarian. Political institutions around the world exercise power in many different ways. At the end of this section, you should be able to answer, how does sociology view politics? What gives legitimacy to a person or a group in power? And what types of government do sociologists recognize? For society to run smoothly, people must often act together for the common good. In complex societies, power is exercised by the state, the primary political authority in the society. A political institution is the system of roles and norms that governs the distribution and exercise of power in the society. Political institutions have evolved over time. Functionalists see the state as centering on the task of maintaining order in society. Conflict theorists look at the way in which political institution affects social change. The two sociological views of politics are the functionalists, in which they analyze the political institution in terms of functions of the state, and conflict focuses on how the political institution brings about that social change. Legitimacy of power refers to whether those in power are viewed as having the right to control or govern others. Authority is a legitimate power. Traditional authority is power that is based on custom, like that of a king or something like that, where it's our custom to recognize he has the power. Dad has the power in the house because he has traditionally been the boss, that kind of thing. Rational legal authority is based on rules and regulations. The United States is a rational legal authority, and it's all based in the Constitution. The president, whether good or bad, has the authority to do the things that he does based on what's the rules of the Constitution. Charismatic authority is based on a personal characteristics of an individual exercising power. Charismatic authority oftentimes are countries like Germany and Italy under Mussolini and Hitler, or Russia during the Soviet Union. All were run by charismatic characters who used their authority by developing cults of personality and that sort of thing, where people would follow them. Many people oftentimes, Franklin Roosevelt was another charismatic character who motivated people through his speech and ideas and was well beloved as a president. Coercion is power used through force and is based on fear. Stalin is a good example of coercion. He obtained his power and then used fear as a way to maintain it. All societies use coercion to an extent, but an illegitimate system has coercion as its main method of maintaining order. Here again, this is where Stalin threw people into labor camps to prevent any opposition. The more that a government relies on coercion, the less stable that government becomes, and this is part of the reason why the Soviet Union collapsed in 1990 or 89. All right, so our traditional leaders, sociologists recognize three types of authority: traditional, rational, legal, and charismatic. Each are unique characteristics. Our traditional leader is, like I mentioned before, our king, in which the power is based on long-standing custom, that they're related to our original leader, that sort of thing. Authority lasts for the life of the leader. Usually a child or other relative becomes the heir to the throne and takes over. Examples include kings and queens and oftentimes tribal leaders. Rational legal authority is power is based on former rules and regulations like those of the United States Constitution, and England and France all have a constitutional authority to run their government. The authority belongs to the office, not the person. So England, for example, has a traditional authority, but it also has rational legal. So it's kind of a mix because they still have a king, which has a lot of say and influence in how the government operates. But the real power rests in the office of the prime minister. Each person holds power only for as long as he or she holds office in the rational legal authority. And that is one of the things that the United States is proud of, is that we can change presidents peacefully and not have to have a revolution or a coup in order to change leadership. Now, charismatic authority, power based on characteristics of the person in power. The authority depends on the people's belief in that particular leader. The leader may lose his following or new leaders may emerge. And examples include a dictator or supreme leader. And we see charismatic leaders often ruling in many of the countries that were communist. We had Lenin and then Stalin. In Cuba, you had Castro and then his brother. In Venezuela, you had Chavez and whoever took over after he did. So which type of authority is the least predictable? All right, so draw your conclusions. What type of authority is the most difficult to sustain from one leader to the next? The charismatic leader. Charismatic leaders oftentimes through the power of their personality, motivate people to follow them. And without that personality, when that person dies or is overthrown, the next person is not as likely to maintain that same sort of enthusiasm. There are types of government. The state that combine the political structures of society, such as the presidency, Congress, and Supreme Court, is the United States. The government is the people who direct the power of the state. Democratic systems is exercising through democratic system is power is exercised through the people. Those who are governed take part in that governing process. The people are involved. Representational democracies are those in which voters elect representatives. Here, the people will get it out there and they'll vote for someone to go to Congress and vote for them. They are not directly involved. Representatives make the political decisions. In constitutional monarchies, they have monarchs have a say, but the ultimate authority rests with the elected officials. Most democratic societies are industrialized. Lenski says that the educated urban population of industrial societies expect a voice. When people work in factories, or they are more opportunity for them to want to have a say. Democracy requires well-informed voters. In a democracy, you have to know what's going on, and therefore education becomes an important factor in a democracy. Democracies are the strongest in societies where public media have open access to information. Limits on power. All governments exercise power, but in democracies there are clear limits placed on government power, and each of the leaders are to be limited. One way to do this is to spread power among many groups. The United States Constitution does this through its efforts to balance the three branches of government. Shared values is, although the right to hold opposing views is a cornerstone of democracy, a shared set of basic values is essential. And this is why we teach about history and things like that, to establish why we believe the things that we do, and everybody understands that. And then we also teach civics so that you will understand how our government operates, and that helps us share in our value of what's important in American society. Now, let's talk about authoritarian systems. In a government based on authoritarianism, power rests firmly with the state. However, this is not Weber's authority of legitimate power. An absolute monarchy is an authoritarian system in which the hereditary ruler holds absolute power. A dictatorship is an authoritarian system in which power is in the hands of a single individual. Louis XIV was the absolute monarch of France and had complete power, where World War II, the dictator of Hitler, he had total power over the government, though he was not a hereditary ruler. A junta is an authoritarian system in which a small group has seized power from a previous government by force, and Idi Amin in Uganda was an example of leader of a junta. And totalitarianism occurs when those in power exercise complete authority over the lives of individual citizens. And here again, Hitler's Nazi Germany, or Mussolini's fascist Italy, or even Stalin's communist Soviet Union would all be examples of totalitarian rule. So what are the two basic types of government? democratic and authoritarian. The United States political system. The United States is one of the few countries with a two-party system. Politicians are influenced by more than just the voters. People develop political beliefs through the political socialization. So the main idea here is the United States is a democracy, but American voters are not only the group influences the government. Our reading focus at the end of this section, you should be able to answer, how does the number of political parties influence a country's political system? How do sociologists analyze those who rule the United States? And what is political socialization? Political parties, topics of special interest associations to sociologists are political parties, special interest groups, voter participation, political models, and political socialization. A political party is an organization that seeks to gain power legitimately. Here in the United States, our two major political parties are the Democrat and Republican political parties. Multi-party systems. Most democracies have a multi-party system in which different parties appeal to people on different issues. This works because of proportional representation. Seats in the government are decided by proportions of votes. So many of the countries that have prime ministers and parliaments are proportional. And in these, what they do is it allows for multiple parties, and multiple parties all have a say in the government. In the event that one party does not win the election and it's split between the three or more parties, they have to organize a majority in order to make alliances with the other political parties in order to create a government. Here in the United States, however, we have multiple parties. We have more than two parties, but generally the Democrat and Republican parties are the only two parties with any real power. And so we are essentially a two-party nation. And nearly all elected U.S. officials since the Civil War have either been Democratic or members of the Republican Party. Critics claim that this method of election prevents the growth of a third party because the two parties tend to dominate the political world and they make laws and rules that benefit the two-party system over the other parties. So what type of political party system do most democratic countries have? The multi-party system or parliamentary type government. Who rules the United States? Interest groups? Interest groups leverage political power to influence policies. They use lobbyists and monetary donations and collections of petitions, organize letter writing campaigns and media campaigns. Some special interest groups that you might be aware of are the National Rifle Association, the United Auto Workers, and various labor organizations, not to mention corporate organizations like there's the group called ALEC, which all strive to influence the writing of legislation and what bills get passed through Congress. Political participation in the United States is one of the lowest rate of voter participation of the world's democracies. Only about 60% of voting age people vote, which is pretty low. I mean, race and ethnicity, age, education level, all affect the rates of voting. Typically what happens is younger people do not vote, and this is why so many things tend to benefit older people. Older people have more money to contribute, and they're more active and more reliable voters. Young people tend not to have much in the way of money and are often busy with lives and education and working and don't think to vote. Political models. The power elite model states that political power is exercised by and for the privileged few. So the power elite are the rich people or the elitists are the ones who are passing the laws to protect each other. The pluralist model states that the political process is controlled by interest groups that compete with one another for power. So the pluralist models is the various groups are striving for the influence of the government. This is easier to see take place in the parliamentary system or the multi-party system because there is a greater level of influence that can be made there. So political interest groups, leading lobbying groups are the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the General Electric Corporation, Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, the American Medical Association, and American Hospital Association. And you can see with this influence here might affect why we've had such a hard time getting some sort of national health care plan in place. Leading political action committees are Operating Engineers Union, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, AT&T Inc., National Association of Realtors, Machinists and Aerospace Union. When it comes to voter participation in the United States fell to historically low levels in the late 1900s. Although participation levels began to rebound in the 2000s, they remained below those of most democratic countries. The following data is from the 2004 election, which had somewhat higher than normal turnout. So of 197 million, the number of U.S. citizens eligible to vote in the 2004 election, only 142 million U.S. citizens were registered to vote. 126 million actually voted. And of those, 72% of the citizens were aged 55 years or older. 47% were 18 to 24. So as you can see, there was a large percentage of older voters voting instead of younger voters. What methods do interest groups use to gain politicians' support? Lobbying, campaign contributions, petitions, letter writing campaigns. And all of these have an effective influence on your congressmen and senators. Political socialization first takes place in the family. Children begin learning political beliefs from their parents and other relatives. Most of us will grow up to believe many of the same political beliefs our parents believe. Parents may also conduct deliberate socialization activities such as taking the child to vote, taking them to political rallies, things like that, which gives the child experience in that political environment. The political viewpoint of mass media is not always announced directly. Political messages become explicit during campaign season. And oftentimes, you won't see the politician except for during an election year. School. Children recite the Pledge of Allegiance every day. This is to help us build patriotism within children and instill the values of liberty and democracy within the American children. Students learn political history of the country and their states and how the government is structured. Peer groups, people with similar characteristics tend to share political beliefs. We tend to hang around with people who think much like we do. And economic status and age are two of the major factors that influence our person's political views. And many times that economic status will influence who you vote for. because whichever party appeals to your particular group of people. The Pledge of Allegiance is a form of political socialization by becoming a social norm that instills the American value of democratic government. Okay, now let's see what you've learned or how you can apply this. This simulation is called There Should Be a Law. And what we're going to try to do is determine how special interest groups influence the creation of laws. In this simulation, you will learn how compromise and conflict play a part of ensuring our laws reflect all of society. I want you to work in groups to write a bill that benefits your group. Assign a moderator in your group. You should have a secretary in the group. That's the person who writes things down. Researchers are the people who are going to look up things. And then a presenter is the person who is going to present this to the class. The moderator, of course, is the one pretty much monitoring to make sure everybody is doing what needs to be done within the group. Choose a special interest and draft a bill that would benefit it. So pick one of the many things in the world that interest you as a group and take that special interest and build an idea for it. Each group will propose their bill to the whole class. So the class will serve as a model Congress for us to determine whether we can get it through. So what did you learn from this lab? As a group, discuss the following. How difficult was it to originate an idea for a law? What do you think the causes of the society to rely on government to create laws and sanctions to reflect our values? And do special interest groups help or hurt the lawmaking process? Should the lawmaking process be simplified or more difficult? And so over here on the right, you see a number of special interest groups and different ideas that you could use to discuss in our simulation here. So that concludes chapter 13. I hope you gained from that, and we'll continue on from here, and I'll talk to you next time.